And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the ABSA Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening. Welcome to your Money Show tonight. Well, of course, the main story is all about the re-election of Donald Trump as U.S. president. He's described it as one of the greatest comebacks of all time. It is an astonishing political achievement, no matter which way you think about it. I suppose one of the questions tonight is he going to do what he says he's going to do? And in some cases, when political leaders come to office making promises, you want to keep them to their promises. I don't know if you really want Donald Trump to stick to his promises. We heard earlier in the week, of course, about what his trade policy would do, basically plunge the world into sort of global depression was one of the forecasts that we heard. I would like to ask you this question, though, on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. Is there one thing Trump has said he will do that you want him to do? Is there one thing that you think, actually, he does need to do this? He said he's going to do it. I want him to do it. Could be anything. Could be about trade. Could be about international foreign policy. Could be about anything. Is there one thing that Trump has said he wants to do that you actually believe he should do? Is there one thing? And I suppose one of the great lessons that'll come now is that, generally speaking, business doesn't like instability. Markets certainly don't. And that's one of the great rules of markets, is that they don't like instability. And I can't help but feel that Trump in that position will lead to greater instability and things will happen. I kind of almost had a feeling that today, I don't know if you remember the time, 2016, 2017, I was a political reporter for EWN at the time, and I sort of felt at the time that almost anything was possible. You know, Jacob Zuma seemed to be losing his grip on power as president, but he couldn't be sure if he was going to stay in or not. And I kind of get a sense about the United States right now. Anything is possible. You just don't really know what is going to happen. I do get a sense, and this is not my analysis, this is from other people, that generally speaking, for smaller emerging market economies such as ours, you want multilateral institutions that institute rules and follow the rules, and maybe the chances of that happening are a little less. One other point to make just before we start, we'll be talking a little later, about an hour from now, a very interesting suggestion that we've all become ruder after the pandemic. And this is particularly about attending events. People just don't pitch up, despite saying that they will. And here's a question. I've noticed that older people will say to you, we're meeting in 2 months' time, and it's in the diary. And you will go there, and they will be there. They'll be expecting you. Younger people will message about, early in the morning of or the day before and say, are we still on? As if it's in doubt. And if you cancelled at that point, there'll be no comeback. We'll be fine. Okay. But that's not the way older people see it. I don't know if you've noticed that difference. Are we just not as polite as we used to be? Good to hear from you tonight on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
So around the world now, investors, analysts, and I suspect political leaders in Lagos, Tswane, Beijing, the Middle East, now we're trying to understand what's going to happen in the US after the re-election of Donald Trump as president. The dollar's soared, the rand's been left reeling, Bitcoin is flying, gold and platinum sinking today, and emerging markets, including the JSE, battling as a result. We start your coverage tonight where we began yesterday with Kane Farabaugh, a multimedia journalist and Midwest correspondent at Voice of America. He updated you yesterday from Wisconsin, where it was raining. Kane, a good day to you there. So the polls had it tied. We thought it might be a few days or weeks before we knew the outcome. Once again, Donald Trump has surprised us.
Yes, the outcome is definitely certain at this point. Trump has won 276 electoral votes. It looks right now that there are perhaps maybe 4 states that still have results that aren't quite clear, but the math definitely shows that former President Donald Trump is the winner.
There'll be a huge amount of discussion about why this happened. It seems the old political saying, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, Americans lived through a period of very high inflation during Biden, and Kamala Harris was tied to that.
Yes, this is really the issue here. So, and this is the point at which Democrats in the United States will have to do some soul searching and complete postmortem on the presidential campaign, because looking at some of the exit polling and some of the numbers that have come out now, in which voters were talked to as they were leaving, casting their ballots, Kamala Harris did not perform as well as Joe Biden did in 2020 among key demographics, that being Hispanic and Latino voters, that being Black voters, that being women voters. These constituencies did not support Kamala Harris as well as they supported Joe Biden in 2020. Looking at the general election, the overall total voting numbers across the United States, too, it looks as if Kamala Harris has received about 15 million less votes than Joe Biden received in 2020. Also, I should point out, it looks as if Donald Trump has received about 2 or 3 million less votes than he received in 2020. So turnout doesn't look to be as robust as it was in 2020. That impacted the outcome. But really, I think that this issue of the economy and the messaging on the campaign trail about the economy wasn't enough to convince voters to support Kamala Harris.
And at this stage, the Republicans have won the presidency. They've won the Senate. What's happening in the House of Representatives?
Well, right now it does look like Democrats are going to pick up a few seats that were held by Republicans, but what isn't certain is if it's enough to flip the balance of control in the House of Representatives. There is a very narrow Republican majority in the House of Representatives. Those tallies and that result could take another couple of days as the voting is being tabulated in certain parts of the country, notably in California and New York. It did look like as if Republicans picked up a few seats in the House, but I think Democrats have also picked up a few Republican seats. How much that's going to shift the majority in the U.S. House right now isn't for certain, but obviously in the Senate right now, it looks as if Republicans have picked up 3 seats in the Senate. They could pick up an additional 2 as the numbers come in. They're still waiting for the result on the Senate race in Wisconsin as well as in Nevada.
Kane Farabaugh, for your coverage today and yesterday. Thank you very much indeed. Multimedia journalist, Midwest correspondent at Voice of America. Joe Klopper is a portfolio manager at Independent Securities. Joe, good evening. So, U.S. markets soaring, the Dow Jones, the other indices opening at record highs, the dollar strengthening, the Bitcoin is up, emerging markets are off. Was all of this expected? If Trump won, if he won as decisively as he has, was this foreseeable?
Yes, hi, Stephen. Yeah, I think it was pretty much expected that we would see a fairly strong U.S. market in the short term. Yields, treasury yields going a bit south. I think that's sort of the playbook that was portrayed should Trump win.
And emerging markets, I mean, I suppose led by China, their markets were beginning to close as Trump claimed victory in Florida this morning. But they have a lot to lose from a Trump presidency, and some other emerging markets are tied to them.
Yes, absolutely. Tariffs have been front and center of his campaign. I think he floated some numbers of up to 60% tariffs of Chinese imports. So they would be suffering. I do expect China to come out with some sort of stimulus package to settle markets. But yeah, trade from China would be issues. We've seen Mexico also under the hammer, that the Mexican peso taking an absolute hammering today. And the rand as well. I think we were down about 2.5% at one stage. So emerging markets far and wide taking a hit.
Trump is the president-elect, and yes, he's spoken on the campaign trail about what he wants to do, but I suppose we get more indications of what I would like to call his real agenda. I mean, we may never know what his real agenda is, because sometimes he seems to contradict himself. Is it possible to know how long this rally is going to last? I mean, American markets probably for at least the rest of the week, I would imagine. At some point, they'll have to run out of steam.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with your statement there. I think there would be some sort of Trump euphoria in the short term. We would have to wait and see what he does. He does talk a lot, and it would. I think that the proof is in the pudding when he really goes out and changes policies. Tariffs would be passed on to the U.S. consumer, and that would lead to possibly to high inflation rates in America. And we've just seen the Fed starting to cut rates, and high inflation would most probably change their view. Maybe not just cutting, but hiking rates at some stage. So I think the tariff issue is the main thing that would affect South Africa, emerging markets, and the world at this stage.
Joe Klopper, thank you very much indeed. Portfolio Manager at Independent Securities. You with the Money Show, 18 minutes after 6. Matete Tulare is the head of FX execution at RMB. Matete, good evening. I mean, the dollar roaring ahead today on the re-election of Donald Trump.
Good evening, Stephen. Yeah, look, I think it's been quite an interesting 24 hours. You are right. The dollar is at its strongest level in a year, as Donald Trump, as we all know, has won the race for the U.S. presidency. That is also triggering a sharp rise in U.S. Treasury yields on speculation that, like you've been mentioning, that whether his policies would keep U.S. interest rates really elevated. And I think the vote was always going to be a distraction from the solid backdrop that we have in U.S. stocks. I mean, just this week we've learned that the U.S. economy is still resilient. Earnings growth keeps looking better and better. Despite Donald Trump advocating for a weaker dollar, the markets believe his policies, like the previous speaker has mentioned, that will possibly fan inflation and slow the pace of Jerome Powell, cutting back, interest rates, and obviously that will boost the dollar. The market at this point in time is pricing around 90 basis points of cut by June. That is down from around 150 basis points just over a month ago. But like we said, I mean, the rand has also been really whipsawed around all over. Just yesterday evening when the initial results started trickling in, we did see the rand weaken to around 17.81, and then this morning we got down to around 17.55 again. It's been all over the show, especially given the fact that we are being driven by all these headlines. And make no mistake, Stephen, there's still another plethora of economic data and risks over the next, call it 15 days. So the market will be watching for that as well.
I mean, so, okay, Trump is the main headline at the moment, but the economic, the sort of market news for the US has all been so incredibly positive. Yes, his re-election might be pushing their three main indices to record highs, but they were going there anyway.
Look, I mean, like you say, it is like that. I mean, the US stocks have just obviously hit a fresh high. If you just look at history tends to show that stocks tend to gain before and right after elections as the market looks past one of the biggest event risks of the year. And now today's move is a really textbook reaction, especially to an outcome that is really seen as bullish for equities. I mean, the financials and the tech stocks were soaring today. The banks and consumer finance shares, they seem as likely to benefit as the changes at those federal agencies will usher in easier rules under Mr. Trump. The big banks may also avoid pencil capital increases under the Basel III endgame. And obviously the robust consumer spending and other strong economic signals support all these financial firms. The likes of Tesla, that is one of the gainers on the S&P 500, especially after Elon Musk's all-in bet on Trump. The likes of Nvidia, all up. The likes of JP Morgan, also at record highs, as well as Amazon. Quite an interesting set of numbers. But I think if you also look at that flip side of it, the logouts in all of these stocks is the interest rate sensitive real estate and also the utilities. That has dropped. And also the solar stocks have also taken a bit of a hammering, as well as the likes of Facebook parent Meta. That is also down. I mean, Mr. Trump has called Facebook an enemy of the people. So it just shows you how it's going to be quite interesting. But like I said, the next focus now after all of this is tomorrow evening with the Fed and obviously the plethora of other data coming out over the next 2 weeks as well.
Matete Tulare, thank you very much indeed. Head of FX execution at RMB. Well, the value of Bitcoin jumping as well today. It's one of a category of equities known as the Trump trades. It's been increasing value as he's got closer to the presidency. Karel Dyeshana is the research lead for blockchain technology at the CSIR. Karel, good evening to you. I realize that Trump says he's the pro-crypto candidate, but Bitcoin seems tied to him so tightly. Why?
Yeah, so Bitcoin's just like everything else today is very green, except for the electoral maps, of course, which is all red. But both presidential candidates actually expressed support for crypto and Bitcoin during their campaigns. But Trump was way more aggressive with his messages. He was a keynote at one of the biggest Bitcoin conferences earlier this year, one of the biggest one on the annual calendar, and he made a few promises there. He first of all promised that that the USA would stockpile Bitcoin, whatever that means. He also promised that he would fire Gary Genslow. Now, that's chairman of the SEC in America, and he was extremely hostile in the last 4 years towards crypto and Bitcoin. So that was a very positive message towards the community. And then he also said a few things like protecting the rights of self-custody and so forth. So yeah, yesterday we've actually seen record outflows from some of the Bitcoin spot ETFs in the US. The institutions were probably looking to move towards liquidity ahead of election outcome uncertainty, but this has backfired a bit because today they will get 10% less Bitcoin for their dollars actually.
What impact can a president in the US have on the value of Bitcoin? I mean, I don't know if he can actually fire the head of the SEC, may be able to. But I mean, can he really actually have a big impact on a cryptocurrency's value over a long period of time?
We've definitely seen sentiment in the crypto price and the investor sentiment be extremely correlated to the political environment and the regulatory environment inside the US. The US being obviously the biggest market for crypto, as it is with anything, and any sentiment, any positive or negative sentiment clearly reflects inside the price as well. So with the previous administration being extremely hostile, there were actually quite hostile movements inside the previous administration being labeled as Operation Choke Point, which was led by Senator Elizabeth Warren inside the U.S. That was extremely detrimental to the crypto industry and the price and general regulations. I mean, it's a lot to go into, but just in general, it was extremely negative. So there's a lot of hope now that this will be turned around.
Okay, so I mean, life gets easier for Bitcoin, I suppose. I would imagine then that this particular surge that we've seen today is all about one particular event, but a lot will still hinge on what Trump says, and then from February what he does.
Yes, of course. That's always a gamble with any presidential candidate, and I think especially Trump. He made big promises, and a lot of these big promises were also driven by huge donations from the Bitcoin and the crypto community, like the big businesses and even individuals in the U.S. That were pro-Bitcoin and pro-Bitcoin policy made massive donations towards his campaign, and that obviously filtered through to the promises as he made at this the National Bitcoin Conference earlier this year, but also in other instances. There was a few instances in which he made very bold public comments towards positive policies. So now I think we'll have to see whether he follows through.
And I mean, I imagine it's not just going to be Bitcoin that benefits from this, other cryptocurrencies as well?
Yes, I think that Bitcoin was definitely, the majority of the donations, if you just look at that, came from Bitcoiners, which actually explicitly did not support other cryptocurrencies so well, but there were also some donations from the Ethereum community and so on. So I think in general, crypto would be at a great advantage. But I think there's definitely there's a possibility that Bitcoin would be the big winner out of all of this.
Karel Dyeshana, thank you so much. Research lead for blockchain technology at the CSIR.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Chris Stewart's portfolio manager at 91. Chris, we haven't really changed the subject. Still all about Donald Trump.
Yes, good evening, Stephen. I'm afraid today is a day that we are obliged to talk about Donald Trump because simply the impact of the US elections has been pervasive across all asset classes, currencies, commodities across the globe. I think partly relief that we've at least seen a peaceful and uncontested election outcome. Even if it hasn't necessarily gone the way that many of us might have liked it to have gone, particularly in this country, I guess. At least we have an uncontested outcome and we don't have any sort of associated drama and violence as we have seen previously, and I think the market's breathing something of a sigh of relief as a result of that. But also, significant dollar strength as I guess markets expecting a Trump presidency to be positive for the US dollar and positive for the US dollar, not least because we're likely to see a swathe of tariffs implemented, or at least Trump has promised to implement a swathe of tariffs. Whether he fulfills his promises remains to be seen. That being seen probably as inflationary across the globe and as a consequence of, I guess, a slightly less benign environment from an inflation point of view than previously hoped for. We're probably going to see a more modest rate of interest rate declines across the globe. That also plays into the hand of dollar strength and typically hasn't been very good for places such as ourselves and emerging markets and emerging market currencies, by and large, feeling some pain today as well.
Platinum and gold shares really taking a hammering on the JSE today. Obviously, a stronger dollar means weaker dollar prices for commodities.
Yeah, that's certainly a significant part of it. A little bit surprised, I guess, by the weakness in gold. There's some certain precious metal characteristics of gold that should hold out reasonably well, particularly if you are anticipating a negative or low real interest rate environment. Gold typically, as a store of value, should hold up well, but perhaps this is a function of where the gold price is coming from as well. And as you indicate quite correctly, most commodities globally are denominated in US dollars, and dollar strength typically is negative for the dollar price of commodities. Add that to the fact that platinum and palladium in particular have significant industrial use, and if we're worried about growth, then that impacts negatively. And we know that the platinum stocks, particularly where the PGM prices are right now, are quite marginal. So any negative moves in the commodity price typically have an exaggerated negative impact on the underlying share prices, and indeed vice versa, as we saw last week when we saw the PGM metals having something of a positive trot.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris Stewart, Portfolio Manager at 91.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, good to hear from you tonight on 011 8830702 021 4460567. Anything in particular you would like Donald Trump to do now that he's been re-elected President of the United States? Any of his promises that you'd like him to actually go ahead and implement? One of the other questions tonight is, have we all got just a little bit ruder, particularly about attending events since the start of the pandemic? I mean, we live so much virtually now. If you don't know someone in the flesh, in real life, do you just treat them differently? I wonder if that might be the case. Good to hear from you tonight on that. F&B confirming today they've now joined a platform that allows them to facilitate cross-border payments across the borders of South Africa, Namibia, Lesotho, and Eswatini. The bank's now joining. It's run by Bank South Africa. It's called Transactions Cleared on an Immediate Basis platform. That's their name, not mine. Essentially, this would mean that you can pay someone in the common monetary area virtually immediately. Richard Porter is the foreign exchange CEO at FNB. Richard, good evening. Thanks for your time. How does this actually work?
Good evening, Stephen. Yes. So how it works is that as a result of the enhanced compliance requirements and the regulatory requirements, payments were required to be moved off the EFT rail to ensure that they comply with the regulations in terms of reporting. And to facilitate this, we developed this TCIB rail, which will then enable transactions to be able to flow between the CMA countries, as you mentioned, on a real-time basis 24/7. So how it works is clients, from a client perspective, they would go onto their online banking as normal, and now they would have to do those payments via the foreign exchange tab, and they would just do their payment as normal. But however, in the background, the payment would get routed to the TCIB rail, and that would enable the payment to flow real time. And it would also enable the payment to be able to be effected after hours, so on weekends and also on public holidays.
Okay, so you're in Namibia. I owe you some money. I would go onto the FNB app if I were an FNB customer, and I'll be able to pay you almost as if you were actually in South Africa.
Correct. The payment would be effected within 60 seconds.
Okay. How much does it cost to conduct these transactions?
So the pricing is between 10 and 30 Rand for these transactions.
Okay. It only works for other FNB account holders, right? You're paying FNB account to FNB account across the borders with these countries. That's it.
Correct. So at the moment, we're the only bank to have implemented it cross-border. So we'll be paying to other FNB customers in the subs. So it'll be from FNB account to FNB account.
Is anything stopping other banks from coming in? I mean, I presume they will come in soon.
No, we certainly are anticipating that other banks will join, and certainly Bankserve Africa would like to see more participation in the rail.
Okay. I mean, I would like to think that over time, moving money around should become easier. What makes this possible is that the currencies of these countries are tied to the Rand, 1-to-1.
Correct. So that's obviously a big enabler in this case. So there's no need for currency conversion. But this is a big step forward in terms of making payments easier, both in terms of availability as well as in terms of the speed of the transaction.
With a little bit of luck, it might also lead to a lot more business involving those countries because paying is now a lot easier. It should stimulate the economy, so it should stimulate trade.
So we certainly hope that that's going to be one of the consequences, and certainly it should be enabling trade, but it's also enabling people who need to send money home and to do low-value payments and also to promote financial inclusion. So hopefully those will be some of the outcomes.
Are you able to make a prediction based on what you can see from the behavior of your account holders, how quickly people are going to take this up? I mean, there must be some people who've been using your foreign exchange services to make regular payments for a long time. You would know that these people will almost automatically move to this system.
Correct. So the adoption has been very high. So the people who were using the foreign exchange platform don't need to do anything. It's people who were previously using the EFT platform that would now need to migrate to the Forex platform. But we have seen incredibly high adoption, and this has been a long time coming. So there's been an extensive change management program, lots of client communication, and so far it's gone really well in terms of the transition.
And it's the kind of thing that you're just going to see people making consistent payments every week and every month. These are clients who are going to be doing this, I presume, probably for the rest of their lives, just as long as the system works, and there's no reason why it won't.
Exactly, and we're also hoping that it'll bring new people to the system, so to solve for some of the people who perhaps were previously unbanked due to the lack of an appropriate solution, and we're hoping that this might speak to that audience as well.
Do you think that moving money around in countries or making payments to countries that do have different currencies where you have to go through a Forex platform, is that going to become much easier than it is now over time? I mean, I would like to think that that's the trend.
Certainly. So it's already happening. I think it's a continuous journey. We are seeing a big move, I guess, globally around some of these closed-loop payment schemes and regional payment schemes, and they're also becoming more integrated into domestic payment schemes. So that's a trend that we're following closely, and we'll obviously try and see how we can leverage that to benefit our clients. But I do think globally there's a lot of pressure on the speed of payments and the transparency of payments, and that's playing out at the moment. So I do think you'll see enhancements coming all the time.
And of course, you've got quite a compliance burden as well.
Yes, so it's significant. I mean, there's significant compliance that goes with doing cross-border transactions, and that's why the cost of doing transactions is often higher than just doing a domestic transaction. And that also speaks to the speed of transaction as the amounts get bigger. This is obviously a low-value payment rail, but as amounts get bigger and transactions get more complicated, the compliance that goes with them obviously also increases.
Richard Porter, thank you, CEO of Foreign Exchange Solutions at FNB. Really do appreciate the time. It's interesting to see how trends like this change. I mean, there was a time when making a payment to someone in another country would take forever and lots of paperwork. And now, of course, it's become easier and easier. Now, if they're in one of these countries, so Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, and, of course, South Africa, now they're getting paid in the same currency, and it's very, very quick indeed. But there is still, I suspect, quite a lot of work to be done behind the scenes on making it easier still.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, proud host of the Absa Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. Absa is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider.
9 minutes now to 7 the time. Well, confirmation today from the printing group Novus Holdings. It's now bought 3 divisions from News 24. There's the distribution business on the dot, the community newspaper group, and the football magazines Kick-Off and Soccer Laduma, but it also means Media 24 is now going ahead to close the print editions of newspapers like Beeld, Report, City Press, and the Daily Sun. Some of these publications have very long, very distinguished histories in South Africa. Anton Harbert is Executive Director of the Campaign for Free Expression, also, of course, a former adjunct professor in journalism at Wits University. Anton, good evening to you, and thank you for your time on The Money Show tonight. We've seen these changes looming for quite a while. News 24 obviously say there are big changes in the way media is consumed. Are there any other options open rather than what they're actually doing?
If there were other options, I think they would definitely be looking at them. But the effect of this, I think, is to accelerate the shrinking of our media and the death of our print news products. Because I think it will have run-on effects for other print products as well. So it is a critical moment in the history of our print media, and not an altogether happy one.
So these papers close. I imagine the brands might live online in some way, but I can't see that they'll have the character they had before.
I think that's right. When they say that, I think that's an attempt to move their readers online. But I would be surprised if they weren't over time absorbed into the News 24 fold and not have too much currency as separate titles. And it's the nature of the internet that that individual titles often have less and play a different role and have a different approach and style than they do as print products. And they have a different place in our lives and in our homes. My guess is that it's a strategic move aimed at trying to keep their readers and draw them into the online fold under News 24 and News 24, News 24. But I think it's just a short-term strategic move.
In a way, there are different things happening here. And what a newspaper does that maybe a website does in a different way or doesn't do at all is about the curation of news. So if I think to use the example of the Sunday Times, the Hogarth column, which is really gossip, but sometimes the best part of the newspaper. Gossip sometimes is, because it may be true or it may not, or someone can say something there they can't say somewhere else. I don't know if a column like that would work, for example, in online for various reasons. So how important is the curation of news? Because some online organizations do that really well. I would argue from a global perspective, The Economist does curation of news very well in a digital space.
Yes, I think when it's tightly edited, tightly curated, focused and well targeted, then it can work very well online. I mean, I have to see the advantages of online as well as the disadvantages. So we lose some things with newspapers, but we gain other things, So the online, for example, is much more interactive and can be allow one to engage much more with journalists individually or with the products. And of course, delivery is much easier, simpler, quicker. So that, there's distinct advantages. I don't think, while people like me who grew out of print lament the loss of newspapers and the role they face, there's no point in lamenting it too much. Let's rather embrace the great advantages of online media.
I'm going to make a general comment about News 24 or put a comment to you to ask for your response. But before I do that, I just want to declare my own conflict of interest in that I write for their competitor, the Daily Maverick. Okay, so that said, it seems to me that News 24 is growing and growing. They have a lot of content, often excellent reporting content. Is it beginning to dominate the online news space in some way? And is that a good or a bad thing?
Oh, without any question. It is the dominant online operation, followed by Daily Maverick, but quite a bit below that, and then the rest are much smaller. And I think the effect of the current changes is that it will consolidate its position. Other titles will close. Some of the online operations tied to those titles will not survive. And I think the unfortunate part is that our range of media, our diversity of media, our plurality of media will diminish. And the likelihood is that one or two of those who succeed in the tough online environment, because even News 24, I don't think is actually making money or not much at all, will survive. And so we are seeing undoubtedly a shrinking of our news options, our news market, and our journalism, and that's most unfortunate and very worrying.
Exactly the same thing has happened in the United States in different ways. I mean, the New York Times sort of dominates that market, does make a lot of money. And I speak to you on the day that Donald Trump has been re-elected for a second term as U.S. president. As a media person, do you think he would have been re-elected without all of the changes of media we've seen in the last 10 years?
That's a good question. He's clearly ridden the wave of social media because he's used it very effectively, in both a constructive and a destructive way, but very effectively. He's clearly benefit from the fact that one of the big outlets, X or Twitter, is dominated by one voice, and that voice recently became a supporter of his. So these are clearly important factors. I don't think you can explain it all on media and social media, because clearly it represents, Americans went out and voted, and clearly they made a choice. And I think those who just simply say it's the media has a huge amount of blame tend to exaggerate that. Americans have made a choice. I don't think it's out of stupidity or ignorance. It's to me a very unfortunate one. It's going to have major negative consequences for journalism and the media, because he's made it very clear that he will move against his critics, that he will move against media he doesn't like, that he will work hard to help the traditional media lose what little pus they have left, and that he has little tolerance for any critical journalism and has vowed to go after them. So I think in terms of free media, critical media, independent media, around the world, this will have major consequences. It's a time when we'll have to defend that space, because when America and the American presidency, which has usually been a defender of an open media space around the world, it looks now will be an aggressor towards it.
Anton Harber, thank you very much indeed. Executive Director at the Campaign for Free Expression, of course, a former adjunct professor in journalism at Wits University. Bringing the time now to 7 o'clock, because we're on time, because we're never rude and always polite. It's time for the news at 7 o'clock on The Money Show.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the ABSA Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of The Money Show. We'll try and keep Donald Trump out of it as much as we can, despite the fact that he was re-elected President of the United States today. A couple of times in my life I've had the great luxury of buying a car. I've never bought a new car, but buying a second-hand car. And I've always been so incredibly nervous. There's a word I won't really use, but uptight. Let me use that word. I think you can work out which word I mean. But incredibly uptight about making sure it was insured before I or someone in my family would drive it out of the shop. And I've always wondered what happens if that goes wrong. I mean, if you drive off in a car and literally, go and have some sort of accident. Well, Wendy Noley, your Consumer Ninja, has been dealing with a case like that recently. That really is interesting. So just stick around for that. You might want to hear that. I'm looking forward to that conversation, actually. And then your shapeshifter tonight, someone who's been leading, I suppose, a creative revolution, Xolisa Dyeshana, and Xolisa's vision for Joe Public United in advertising. One of the questions I'll ask Xolisa is, when did you first see an advert? What was it about an advert? Can you remember it? Was there a power in the image? Was it for something that's not even sold legally? Whatever it is, something that's not advertised legally now. What was it about advertising that first grabbed you? One of the questions that I'll ask in your Shapeshifter segment of this evening. And then, of course, we will talk in a moment about rudeness on The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Business Unusual.
So I don't know if you feel this, but maybe the way in which we relate to each other has changed a little bit during the pandemic, and perhaps we're not as nice to each other as we were before. Richard Mulholland's the founder of Missing Link and Too Many Robots. He has some insights into this. Richard, good evening. You often run events. What have you found is actually happening? What's changed since the pandemic that made you think about rudeness?
Well, Stephen, before the pandemic, I would find that for every 100 people that you invited to an event, 90 of them would arrive after RSVPing. So 90 of the people that would say they would come out of the 100 would arrive. During the pandemic, that changed because we would sign up to online events, and often we would just sign up in order to get the recording later. So you never felt quite as obliged, and a lot of these events had thousands of people, and there was no real consequence of you not showing up. Well, what I've found is that people are now doing that, but in person. So they're RSVPing to events, and then they're just not showing up. And the difference is that there are very real consequences here, because rooms have been booked and meals have been paid for, gifts have been bought, and people just don't show up. And I do think it's rude. The numbers now across the industry seem to be 30%. It's gone to 30% no-shows of people who RSVP'd yes.
That's a very high number, because that also means that someone who RSVP'd yes, presumably, looked at their diary and then put it in their diary before deciding not to arrive.
Yeah, so what happens, of course, is that past us makes decisions that future us have to live by. And sometimes by the time future us gets there, we're like, oh, I don't know about this. I mean, I often feel that way about weddings, when I say yes months in advance, and then in the morning of the wedding, I'm like, wow, geez, I've not seen this person in 3 years. What am I doing? And but that's the way it works. And so what happens, I think, in the corporate space, people sometimes say yes. I think a lot of people put it in their diary, leave the office, and just don't bother showing up to the event, so they have an excuse. If I'm somewhat cynical, though.
Wasn't this building in some way before the pandemic? I mean, I've found for a little while, if I make an agreement with an older person to, and a date in their digital calendar for a couple of months' time, they'll always be there. I don't need to communicate. There won't be any communication before that meeting. It's there, so it'll happen. I find younger people, and I do this too, will send you a WhatsApp on the day before or the day of and say, is it still happening? And if it's cancelled, it's like no big deal. In other words, it's not really confirmed until a couple of hours before, even if it's been in your diary for weeks.
Yeah, that's funny. In fact, I've never really thought about it, but you're absolutely right. The number of times where I have had people message me say, hey, are we still meeting tomorrow? And, from the moment we decided to meet, it'd been in my calendar. It never crossed my mind that we wouldn't be. But the fact that there was any idea that it may not happen. But I think this is a good best practice, because you see, what I said about past and present me, I think the younger generation perhaps have figured that out. And so if I asked Stephen, or 4 weeks ago, should we have this conversation today? You might agree. But if I want to make sure that you still feel like it, well, then I have to ask you yesterday, because yesterday you is pretty much you. And so if I phone you and say, hey, or, earlier today, are we still going to have this chat today at 7? Then you'd say yes. And then current you feels like you've agreed to this. So, because I do believe that we exist in this kind of temporal phasing in which we exist almost as different humans, past, present, and future versions of ourselves. And we hold ourselves to different standards.
No, I think that's true. Plenty of science fiction books already to be incited by what you've said. But yes, no, I think that's true. I mean, there's another way of looking at it, and I do wonder if maybe the world of work. So I'm not denying that we've changed and become ruder. I think that's true. But could the world of work have changed as well? In other words, before the pandemic, you would have had so many meetings face-to-face probably in a week. After the pandemic, you have many more virtual meetings than you would ever have had in your life across the week. And the result of that is that you have more meetings in a week now than you would have before. Even, in other words, we're actually just busier, is what I'm saying, is that something has shifted in the world of work.
So I think you're absolutely spot on, but I also think grow up. If you commit to doing something, show up. I mean, I think it's that we should hold ourselves accountable to what we say we will do. I don't think that will ever go out of fashion. And I think what had happened is that the not showing up to an online event was a victimless crime. You were just one less number that showed up. Nobody cared. And in fact, it was fine because you got the recording so you could watch something at your leisure. I think that we've carried that thinking, and I just don't think that a lot of people have properly processed and stopped to think about this idea that there is a real cost. The one event I was speaking at last week, a few people had booked special meals, kosher, halal, vegan, and a bunch of those people were among the no-shows. And I just happened to ask, and it was 1,000 rand for one of the kosher meals catered for this event. So somebody had asked for specific catering requirements and then didn't show up at the event. I'm sure the halal and vegan things were similar. So because you pay quite a premium when a caterer has to prepare a small amount of food. So I think that people have carried this across, and for sure people are busy, but I just don't think that that's enough. I think we have to realize that when we say yes to this, and in fact, I kind of put forward that perhaps we need to think about things in a slightly different way. Maybe a lot of these free events should say, well, this event is free if you arrive, but if you don't arrive, you pay. Because I think there needs to be consequence to not showing up.
So, I mean, that would be one way to push it back. I mean, I don't know if naming and shaming would work either, and would probably have all sorts of other consequences. But it could be quite a difficult culture to push back on. People have become used to it already.
Yeah, and what's tolerated is replicated. It's the same thing about starting events late. I always work under the premise that we should stop punishing the people who arrived on time on behalf of the people who arrived late. And what I've seen, I'm a member of an organization of entrepreneurs called EO, and what I saw is that we started pushing the events out to start 10, 15 minutes late, to the point where the people who used to arrive on time now realized, and they got the joke, so they didn't bother. So then what happened is the assumption would be that everything would start 15 minutes late, and then you end up starting 30 minutes late. And again, what's tolerated is replicated. So we need to decide that there should be some degree of consequence to actions. And maybe naming and shaming is wrong, but I quite like and maybe it's too passive aggressive, but sending somebody an email the next day and asking if they were okay.
Yeah.
Hi, so sorry you didn't make it to the event yesterday. I know you said you were coming, so I just wanted to check that everything was okay. And then, if an apology happens at that point, then, people will realize that, okay, now they feel a bit guilty. But again, right now, there's no consequence to the actions whatsoever.
I mean, I've done that with radio interviewees before, not for a long time, but I have done it, and it is effective, but it is very passive aggressive. I wonder if this is just a consequence of the virtual world, and that we don't see people we haven't met as fully human. And that's a big thing to say, I realize. But people don't, we're so used to what's happened in the virtual world. It comes back to what you've said several times, that there's no consequence. And there's no consequence because we don't see the person who organized it as actually fully human, because we haven't met them yet.
Stephen, I think you're spot on. And a lot of people actually mentioned in the comments on the LinkedIn post I did on this, things like, if you want to ensure, an event manager said they phone people in the morning and have a chat to them. Hi, Stephen, just looking forward to chatting to you. This is Sue from such and such. And then it's not some nameless, faceless invite. It's you and Sue. And so then you almost feel, well, I've spoken to somebody. I don't want to let them down. And the one person said that if they could get people to do a quick video call, and just, hey, I just wanted to chat to make sure you're coming today. As soon as they've seen face to face, the sign shows that the numbers go way up on somebody showing up. And this speaks to the very point you make about this nameless, faceless relationship that we have with people. And how do we, and that's what we have to change. But I do think certainly sending a message on the day, or if you can, doing a phone call the day before just to say, hey, we're just doing the final catering numbers. We just want to make sure you are still with us. I think would be very good, because it does make that personal connection. And then you've not just clicked on a link, you've physically said, yes, I will be there.
Yes.
And I think then your actual word is your bond, not just your little double click on an email screen.
But you'll be worried that you're WhatsApping a bot, and then you never get out of it, do you?
Yeah, exactly. What a time to be alive.
Richard, especially today. Richard Mulholland, thank you very much indeed. Founder of Missing Link and Too Many Robots. Really appreciate it.
The Money Show.
Consumer Ninja.
Wendy Nola, of course, is your consumer ninja, and she joins you now. Wendy, good evening. It's quite a heartbreaking story, and it's something that really made me think, because once or twice in my life when I've bought a car, I've been really concerned about making sure that it's properly insured. You're still paying it off, of course. It's properly insured before you leave the dealership. And it should be pretty clear when something is insured and when something is not. You have a really fascinating example about something that went really badly wrong.
I do. And it's one of those cases. I mean, I deal with a lot of heartbreaking cases, Stephen, as you can imagine. And this one has just been sticking with me for the last sort of 5 days since I've been dealing with it, because it's just had such a catastrophic impact on this couple. So on the 19th of October, that's around 2.5 weeks ago, a Vereniging couple bought their first car, a 2021 Kia Rio, financed over 7 years, and insured by King Price. The customary confirmation of insurance letter that you speak of, Stephen, was supplied by King Price. And the whole reason for that that stipulation, it's by the banks. The banks say the car must not leave the dealership floor until we have seen confirmation of insurance. And I'm just busy buying a car, also a second-hand car right now. And I bought it and in the last week. And I had to arrange that. I arranged my own insurance, and I had to send that insurance confirmation to the dealership's finance person before they could proceed. Right? Okay. So, it turned out to be, in this case of this couple, a false assurance, because the husband. It was a Saturday. Hey, they went into the dealership on a Saturday, drove off with the car, all done. Insurance confirmed. They got it over the phone from King Price. 2 days later, on the Monday, they were in an accident. It doesn't appear to be the husband's fault, but that's neither here nor there. The car was declared an insurance write-off, and then King Price denied the claim on the grounds of non-payment. The wife emailed me to say that was very unfair. Please, can I investigate? Because the first, yes, they hadn't paid, but the first premium, this was the 21st of October, and the first premium was only due, that's 4,400 Rand, 10 days later, because they chose the debit order date as the last day of the month, 31st of October. And this accident happened 10 days before. So she was like, this is not right, and you can understand it.
Sure. I mean, it doesn't seem right because, insurance is insurance. Once you've got the letter that it's insured, it's insured. What happened here?
And yes, you do have to pay, but in their minds, it was, the premium was only due on the 31st of October. Okay. So I did take this up with King Price, and they pointed out, firstly, which is something I didn't know actually, is that insurance is paid for in advance, not in arrears, right? And that's why if you buy the car on the 12th or the 7th or whatever, you then need to pay what they call a pro rata amount, which is just a proportion of the month to take you until the end of in their case, the 31st of October. So they had to insure that car from the 20th or the 19th of October to the 31st when that first full premium went off. And they were told on the call, and it's not in their favor. They told the husband's told there's a pro rata amount, it's 550 Rand or thereabouts, and it's going to in the call they say today, but of course it was a Saturday. So can you believe it, Stephen? They actually attempted to take that 550 on the Monday, the day of the accident, and it failed. Oh. And they tried 3 times in quick sessions. And he said he didn't catch that in the sales call. He didn't get the significance of it, although they say there will be 2 payments. So they lost on that. I think the word pro rata, it's a term that insurance uses for this first sort of part payment. But I think given the demographics of the country, everything, they should actually, I don't know, just maybe use another term, like a more simple term to explain what that means. Anyway. So the day of the accident, and that was the end of that.
But they still had a letter of confirmation. So, if the letter was there, then, that means they're insured. Otherwise, what's the point of the letter?
Well, exactly. So the letter of confirmation is just that, and you'd think, okay, it's done. So I said to King Price, but why not only issue that letter of confirmation once the pro rata amount has been paid. Then everybody's got absolute assurance that certainly, as you drive off, the car's insured. And I was told by King Price that's impossible for insurance companies to wait for confirmation of valid payment of the pro rata premium before sending the letter. 9 out of 10 times they say the client is at the dealership ready to take the vehicle, or cover has to accept immediately, as in this case. So the pro rata debit order will only run at midnight on the same day or on the first business day if cover is requested over a weekend, as it was in this case. The insurer has to trust that the debit order will be honored. But it's so unfortunate. I don't know. I would say if I was this is one of my bits of advice I would like to give is wait till that money's gone out of your. Wait until you know you absolutely are covered before driving that car. Who wants to be at risk? It's madness.
Well, it's also an era of instant payments. Instant payments. There should be a sort of credit card.
This is true.
You should be able to pay online with
something.
a credit card. Yeah. There's also, though, and I know this has happened with me, there's a grace period with insurance. So if you miss a premium, if it bounces, and that happens, you're still covered.
Yes, there's a grace period of 30 days, according to the industry's policyholder protection rules. And it saved a lot of people, right? And they must tell you, look, you haven't paid, you've got until this date, otherwise your policy lapses. But I discovered this only with this case. I love the way, you keep learning in this game. King Price says the PPR, the policyholder protection rules, don't require insurance companies to give any grace period on the pro rata, that part payment that you make, or the first premium payment. And if this is not honored by the client, the policy does not incept. I wish they'd use normal language. It does not start. Due to this, cover only started on the 31st. Because shame, Stephen, that debit order, and it was a much larger amount, 4,500, say, it went off his account on the 31st because he'd made provision for that. It was the end of the month. But it was too late. So I've gone back to the insurer to say, and it was only this afternoon, so I haven't given them enough time to get back to me, to say, given how much is at stake here, why doesn't the insurer proactively inform the client that the vehicle in question is not covered if they see that the pro rata was unsuccessful? They didn't manage to get that money, and they know then that the vehicle is not covered. Shouldn't they just then proactively send an SMS or do something to say, please beware, we haven't been able to get payment from you, and you are currently driving an uninsured car?
Sure.
I don't know. I just think that would be fairer. But and I've gone to the bank involved to say, how do you feel about this? You've got a confirmation letter, but actually now your client is exposed. They've still owe. Can you imagine? This is a 7-year payment plan, Stephen, and the cars are write-off. They'll get some money for the wreckage, but their finances are now wrecked for years. It's utterly heartbreaking.
And I suppose there isn't much of a case for the short-term insurance ombudsman either.
No, because the sales call was very clear. They mentioned the pro rata. They said it's going off tonight, and for some reason he just didn't grasp that. I must make sure there's money there. I don't think that this would be it's not a completely isolated case. I think other people might just have their focus on, okay, my debit order's at the end of the month, I know I'll have money then. I just would hate this to happen to more people. And I think maybe, I don't know, they're not required to, but I think if they just said, look, we couldn't get you a pro rata amount, please pay urgently because your car is currently not insured, would just be an extra step to avoiding what's happened to this unfortunate couple.
Wendy, thank you very much indeed. Wendy Nolas, your consumer ninja. And it's the kind of story that I suppose Wendy chooses to tell you because it also just reminds you to make sure everything is ready. If someone in your family is about to go and buy a car, just make absolutely certain it's insured before it leaves the dealer floor. And it also just tells you about red tape. In an era of instant payments, this is the kind of thing that really shouldn't be happening. Bringing the time on The Money Show to 7:30.